Dr. Lazarev's archives. File number 019. The case that took my assistant away from me. There are sounds that stick in your memory forever. The crackle of burning wood, the last breath of a dying man, the screech of brakes before an inevitable collision. But what haunts me most is the hiss of the radio airwaves when, between stations in a dead zone of frequencies, a voice from the past suddenly breaks through. November 1995 was dank and endless. The basement of the old Research Institute of Radioelectronics, where I had set up my archive, smelled of dampness, musty papers, and metal dust. The walls, covered with condensation, reflected the weak light of a single bulb dangling on a wire between the shelves. Files that officially did not exist flowed here, into this concrete womb: KGB archives, classified medical records, protocols of experiments that they preferred to forget. I was sorting through another box of documents from the closed department of the Mormont's directorate when I heard a knock on the metal door. 3 short knocks, a pause, 2 more, a conditional signal used by my few colleagues. Polina Egorova, my new assistant, whom I had met a month ago at an archivist conference, appeared in the doorway. Polina was the embodiment of a new era: a strict suit, a neat haircut, a leather briefcase with modern equipment in her hands. The digital technologies that she brought to my analog world promised a revolution in working with archives. But the main thing that won me over about her was that she did not ask unnecessary questions about the nature of my abilities. She simply accepted as a given that I could hear emotional imprints in old records and objects. Dr. Lazarev, her voice echoed in the empty basement. I brought equipment for digitization. And something else interesting. She placed a metal suitcase on the table and opened it, revealing modern equipment: a digital tape recorder, amplifiers, and latest generation headphones. Next to them, like an exhibit from a museum, lay the Soviet radio station Spectre 2, an angular green box with many switches and regulators. I found it at a flea market, Polina explained, taking out the station. The seller said it was from some closed laboratory. I thought it might be useful for working with audio archives. I picked up the radio and immediately felt that this device remembered. Voices, emotions, and last words were locked in the metal case, like in a tin can. My gift, which I prefer to call audio vision, allowed me to catch these traces of the past. Sometimes these were fragments of conversations, sometimes death cries, and sometimes just the heavy silence of those who held these objects in their hands. An interesting specimen, I muttered, studying the serial number on the back panel. A 1987 special edition. There weren't many of these. 1987, the year that divided my life into before and after. The year Anna died in a car accident, leaving me alone with unanswered questions. That's when I left medicine and delved into the world of archives, hoping to find an explanation for my own tragedies and others. Polina, meanwhile, was hooking up modern equipment to the Soviet radio station, creating a strange technological hybrid. Her movements were precise, professional. She worked with electronics as deftly as a surgeon with a scalpel. In her presence, the basement seemed less gloomy, more habitable. "Shall we try to turn it on?" she suggested, looking at me over her glasses. I nodded, although something inside me tightened. Premonition is an old companion of all who deal with the paranormal. Polina pressed the power switch, and the radio came to life with a characteristic hum of lamps. Green indicators began to blink on the dial. The instrument needles twitched, found their positions. At first, there was only the noise of the airwaves and the headphones, white, monotonous, soothing. Polina slowly turned the tuning knob, sorting through the frequencies. Military radio networks, amateur stations, music from commercial radio stations, the usual cacophony of the modern airwaves. But suddenly, between 19.40 and 19.50, in the dead zone where there should be no signals, the tuning needle froze by itself. The noise died down. The silence in the headphones was so complete that I could hear my own heartbeat. And then, as if from an infinitely distant past, a voice cut through. Alyosha, this is Anya. Can you hear me? The world stopped. Time folded into a point where past and present met. I tore the headphones off my head, but the voice continued to sound, now from the speakers of the radio station, filling the basement with familiar intonations. Polina looked at me with bewilderment, not understanding the reason for my reaction. For her, it was just a female voice on the air, perhaps a radio amateur on a homemade transmitter. But I knew this voice better than my own. Every intonation, every shade, everything was painfully familiar. Anna Lazareva, my wife, who died 8 years ago, spoke to me over the radio. Alyosha, I know you can hear me. Something terrible will happen tomorrow. At 1547 on the M18 highway, near the village of Mezdurikai, a red Moskvich, license plate 0127KV. The driver will lose control on a turn and crash into a school bus. 6 children will die. The voice was calm, businesslike, like a newscaster. But I remembered that tone. That's how Anna spoke when she told me about critical conditions of patients in intensive care. No emotion, just facts, because emotions got in the way of saving lives. You can prevent this, Alyosha. You must. The radio station went silent. The instrument needles fell limply to 0. The green indicators went out. Silence reigned in the basement again, broken only by the hum of the ventilation and the dripping of condensation from the ceiling. Polina was the first to break the silence. Doctor, are you all right? You look like you've seen a ghost. Saw. No, heard. And it was worse than any vision, because voices from the past rarely lie. My gift has never failed me in the main thing. If the dead speak, then there's a reason. It remains only to understand what it is. I stood up and walked around the basement, trying to collect my thoughts. For 8 years, I had gotten used to the fact that Anna was dead. I had come to terms with the loss, learned to live with the emptiness in my chest. But now that emptiness was filled with a familiar voice, and the pain returned with double the force. Polina, I said, turning to her, did you record the signal? She shook her head. The digital equipment turned on only after the radio station went silent. And the Spectrum does not have a built-in recording device. Of course, paranormal phenomena were rarely recorded by technology. It was as if there was some kind of barrier between the worlds of the living and the dead, which allowed only direct perception, but blocked attempts at documentation. I walked up to the radio and ran my fingers over its casing. The metal was cold, but not dead. Some kind of energy pulsed through it, as if the device were not a communication device, but a portal between dimensions. On the side panel, I noticed a small plate with engraved text. Experimental model. Ni minus neli gumenseitse. Not for civilian use. Ni minus neli gumenseitse. I heard about this institute, one of the closed enterprises that develops special communications for the military. According to rumors, they studied not only traditional radio technology, but also more exotic methods of transmitting information. Parapsychological communication, telepathy, contacts with the other side, everything that could give the Soviet army an advantage in the invisible war. Doctor, Polina gently touched my shoulder. What was that voice? Why did you react like that? I was silent for a long time, wondering whether I should tell her the details. On the one hand, she was a professional and had a right to know what she was dealing with. On the other hand, some stories were best kept to oneself, especially those involving the dead. It was my wife's voice, I said at last. She died 8 years ago. Polina blinked, processing the information. I saw a familiar mixture of sympathy and professional skepticism in her eyes. She was a scientist, and for her, there was a rational explanation for everything, even paranormal phenomena. It could be a psychological response to stress, she suggested cautiously. The subconscious could have superimposed a familiar voice on a random radio signal. It happens. Perhaps. If it weren't for the details Anna gave. The exact time, place, car number. Too precise to be a hallucination. Too real to be a figment of the imagination. I glanced at my watch. 11:17 p.m., less than 17 hours remained until the predicted tragedy. Enough time to verify the information and, perhaps, prevent the catastrophe. But to do that, I had to believe the voice on the radio. Believe that my dead wife had somehow found a way to contact me. We need to test the radio, I said, turning the device on again. If this is truly a paranormal phenomenon, it could happen again. Polina nodded, taking out a notebook. Her skepticism did not interfere with her professional integrity. If we were dealing with an anomaly, it needed to be studied and documented. The radio came to life again, but now there was only the usual cacophony of signals on the air. We spent more than an hour sorting through the frequencies, but Anna's voice no longer appeared. It was as if the connection between the worlds worked on its own schedule, inaccessible to the understanding of the living. Around midnight, we stopped trying. Polina collected her equipment, but left the radio station on the table. We'll continue the experiment tomorrow, she said, heading for the exit. And doctor, if the accident the voice predicted really does happen tomorrow. I know. I interrupted her. This will change everything. Left alone, I sat for a long time in front of the radio station, peering into its dark dial. Somewhere in the depths of the device, in a labyrinth of wires and lamps, a bridge to the past was hidden, or to the place where the past meets the present, creating the possibility of the impossible. Anna was dead. That was a fact I had lived with for 8 years. But the dead sometimes find a way to reach the living, especially when lives are at stake. And if my wife had found a way to warn me of tragedy, I had an obligation to listen. Tomorrow will show if she is right, or Polina is right, and this is just a figment of a sick imagination. In any case, tomorrow at 15:47, I will know the answer to the question that has haunted me for many years. Is there life after death? And if so, what price must be paid for the connection between worlds? The radio was silent, but I felt its presence, warm, alive, full of unsolved secrets. In this basement, among the archives of forgotten tragedies, a new story was beginning. A story about how the dead try to save the living and the price that must be paid for each rescue. A sleepless night left a bitter taste in my mouth and a heaviness in my temples. I sat in my basement archive, staring at the Spectre 2 radio station, which had been silent since Anna's voice sounded. The metal body of the device reflected the light from the table lamp, and in these reflections, I seemed to see my wife's face, just as I remembered it the last time. 1987. Anna worked as a communications operator at a military base near Murmansk, and I was still a radio operator in the same unit. We met in the radio room during the night shift. She was tuning frequencies, and I was catching long-distance signals. Her hands moved over the switches with amazing precision, as if she felt every wave, every vibration of the air. Radio is not just technology, she said then. It is a bridge between souls, even when they are separated by kilometers. Now we were separated not by kilometers, but by 8 years of death. And yet she found a way to reach me through the ether. Polina showed up at the door at exactly 9 in the morning, as we had agreed. She had a thermos of coffee and a folder with printouts in her hands. I checked the traffic police reports for yesterday, she said without greeting him. There were no serious accidents on the M18 highway. The red Moskvich with the 0127 kV license plate was indeed stopped for a document check at 15:30, 17 minutes before the predicted time. The driver was drunk. I felt something tighten in my chest. Anna's prediction had come true, or rather, it had helped prevent the tragedy. But that meant that the voice on the air was not a hallucination, not a figment of a sick imagination. My dead wife had really spoken to me. How is this possible? Polina whispered, sitting down on a chair. From a scientific point of view, this is absurd. The dead cannot predict the future. I picked up the radio and ran my fingers over its body. The metal was cold, but something inside was pulsing, a barely perceptible vibration that only those with the gift of audio vision could sense. The device was more than just a means of communication. It was a portal between worlds. Maybe they don't predict, I said slowly. Maybe they just see what's going to happen if no one intervenes. And then they try to change the course of events, using us as guides. At that moment, the radio station came to life on its own. The green indicators began to blink. The instrument needles began to twitch. I quickly put on my headphones, tuning in to the frequency 19.47. At first, there was only the noise of the air, but gradually a familiar voice began to break through the interference. Alyosha, can you hear me? Yes, Anya. I hear. Polina jumped up when she heard me answering the void. But for me, the voice was more real than anything that was happening in that basement. Yesterday, you saved 6 children, Anna continued. But tomorrow, a new tragedy will happen. In house number 15 on Mirror Street, a gas boiler will explode. The time is 8:14. A family will die. A father, a mother, and 2 children. The last name is Kuznetsov. The voice was calm, businesslike, but I could hear the pain in it. The same pain Anna felt when she couldn't save a patient in intensive care. She worked as a nurse, and every death hurt her to the core. How do you know that? I asked. Where are you now? But the connection was interrupted as suddenly as it had appeared. The radio station went silent, leaving us alone with a new mystery. Polina looked at me with wide eyes. Who were you talking to? With Anna. She warned about a new tragedy. I told her about the boiler explosion and the Kuznetsov family. Polina silently wrote down the details in a notebook, but I saw how her hands were shaking. Rational thinking was struggling with the obviousness of a paranormal phenomenon. If this is true, she said finally, then we'll have to alert the emergency services tomorrow morning. But how do we explain the source of the information? I stood up and walked around the basement. The shelves with the archives towered around me, like silent witnesses to human tragedies. How many stories did these files hold? How many unspoken dying words, untold secrets, unsolved mysteries? We'll say we received anonymous information, I decided. The main thing is to save people. Explanations can wait. We spent the next hours trying to contact Anna again. We tried frequencies, adjusted devices, recorded every sound on Paulina's digital equipment. But the airwaves were silent. Only occasionally did strange sounds come through the headphones, like someone's footsteps along an echoing corridor, like breathing in an empty room. Doctor, Polina said quietly, what if this is not your wife? I looked back at her. What do you mean? What if someone is using her voice to manipulate you? What if it's a trap? This thought came to my mind more than once, but each time I pushed it away. The voice was too familiar, too dear. No one could have reproduced all the intonations, all the peculiarities of Anna's speech so accurately. A trap for what? I asked. To force me to save people? Polina shrugged, but I saw doubt in her eyes. She was beginning to believe in the reality of what was happening, and it scared her. By evening, we had given up trying. I accompanied Polina to the exit and was left alone in my underground kingdom. The radio stood on the table, silent and mysterious. I looked at it for a long time, thinking about the nature of the connection between the worlds. Maybe death is not the end, but a transition to another state? Maybe there, beyond the edge, souls gain the ability to see the future and try to prevent tragedies? Or maybe this is just a projection of my subconscious, which cannot come to terms with loss. But the facts were irrefutable. Yesterday, Anna predicted the accident, and this accident was prevented. Tomorrow I will find out if she was right about the boiler explosion. I turned on the radio station one last time before leaving. The airwaves were empty, but at the very end, when I was about to turn off the device, a barely audible whisper sounded in the headphones. Alyosha, be careful. What's dead doesn't always stay dead. And not all the voices on the air mean well. I turned off the radio and quickly left the basement. Behind me was darkness, full of unspoken secrets and unlived lives. But now I knew that tomorrow everything would change. Either I would finally believe in Anna's voice, or I would realize that I was going crazy. In any case, there was no turning back. The radio airwaves connected me to the world of the dead, and this connection was becoming stronger and stronger. The morning of November 8th was gray and chilly. At 7 in the morning, I was already standing in a telephone booth on the corner of Mirror Street, clutching a piece of paper with the emergency number in my hand. House number 15 towered before me, a typical Khrushchev-era building with peeling plaster and icy windows. The Kuznetsovs were sleeping in one of the apartments, unaware that in an hour and 14 minutes their lives would end. I dialed the gas service number, trying to speak calmly and convincingly. I have information about a potential gas leak in the house at number 15 on Mirror Street. An urgent inspection of the boiler room is needed. The duty officer asked the standard questions. Who am I? Where did I get the information? Why didn't I contact the building manager? I answered evasively, citing an anonymous source and a request for confidentiality. In the end, the conviction in my voice did its job. They promised to send an emergency team within an hour. I stayed to wait near the house, hiding in the entrance opposite. Lights were beginning to come on in the windows. Residents were getting ready for a new day. Ordinary Soviet life. Breakfasts, getting ready for work, children's whims. No one knew that the sword of Damocles hung over all this. At 8:05, a yellow emergency vehicle pulled up to the house. Two workers in blue overalls took a gas analyzer out of the trunk and headed for the basement entrance. I followed them with my eyes, feeling my heart pounding. A few minutes later, they rushed out of the basement, talking loudly to each other. Concentration is critical, one of them shouted into the radio. The house needs to be evacuated immediately. Then everything happened as if in slow motion. More cars arrived, fire trucks, police, ambulances. Residents of the house were led out into the street in their home clothes. Among them, I saw a family that was supposed to die, a middle-aged man, a woman with a baby in her arms, a boy of about 10. The Kuznetsovs, alive, scared but alive. At 8:14, exactly at the time Anna had said, a dull bang thundered in the basement. The explosion was small, but enough to destroy the boiler room and the lower floors of the building. If the family had stayed in the apartment, I walked away from the scene feeling a strange mixture of triumph and horror. Celebration because the prediction had come true and 4 people had survived. Horror because it meant that what was happening was real. Anna's voice on the air was not a hallucination, not a figment of a sick imagination. My dead wife really could predict tragedies and try to prevent them. Polina was waiting for me in the archive with a thermos of hot tea and a pack of news reports. When she saw my face, she immediately understood everything without words. Was there an explosion? She asked quietly. I nodded, sitting down on a chair near the radio station. At 8:14, just as Anna predicted, but the family survived. They were evacuated 10 minutes before the explosion. Polina silently wrote down my words in her notebook. Her hands were shaking. The scientific worldview was cracking under the pressure of inexplicable facts. "It's impossible," she muttered. "From the point of view of physics, thermodynamics, any science at all, it's simply impossible. And yet it happens." I turn on the radio, tuning in to the frequency 19.47. The air was quiet, but not empty. There was a presence in it, as if someone was standing nearby and breathing into the microphone. Polina connected her digital equipment, preparing to record any signal. Anna's voice came without warning, clear and distinct. "Alyosha, can you hear me?" "Yes, Anya. I saved the Kuznetsov family." "I know. You did well. But now I have to explain something to you." There was something new in the voice, an anxiety that had not been present in previous communication sessions. "Every rescue has a price," Anna continued. "Death cannot be cheated. It can only be redirected. The children you saved from the accident the day before yesterday died last night from poisoning in the hospital. The Kuznetsov family will die in a fire a week later." The world around me rocked. What I had taken for a victory over fate turned out to be only a delay in the inevitable. "What do you mean by that?" I asked in a hoarse voice. "I want to say that we do not save people. We give them the last week of life. Time to say goodbye, say important words, finish the work started. This is also important, Alyosha. Sometimes 7 days mean more than 70 years." Polina looked at me with wide eyes. She didn't hear Anna's voice, but she understood the gist of the conversation from my reactions. "Tomorrow at 16:30 at the railway crossing near the village of Sosnovka, a freight train will derail," Anna continued. "A girl playing near the tracks will die under the wheels. Her name is Lena Morozova. She's 8 years old." "I will prevent this," I said automatically. "Yes, but remember the price. Every rescue is a deal with fate, and sooner or later, fate will demand retribution." The connection was interrupted as suddenly as it had appeared. I took off my headphones and sat silently for a long time, digesting what I had heard. Polina came up to me and put her hand on my shoulder. "What did she say?" I told her about the price of salvation, that death can only be postponed, but not canceled. Polina listened silently, writing down every word. "If this is true," she said at last, "then we are not participating in a rescue operation, but in some kind of cosmic game whose rules are unknown to us." She approached the radio station, carefully examined its body, and suddenly stepped back, pointing at the metal surface with her finger. "Doctor, look at this." There were fingerprints on the side panel of the radio station, clear, as if they had been left in wet paint. But Polina and I had not touched that place, and the prints were too small, female. "Are these her tracks?" Polina whispered. I ran my finger over the prints. The metal was cold, but something moved beneath the skin, a barely perceptible vibration, as if the device were pulsing in time with someone else's heartbeat. "The boundary between the worlds is becoming thinner," I said. "Each communication session makes it more transparent. Sooner or later." I didn't finish, but Polina understood without words. "Sooner or later the border will disappear completely, and then the world of the living and the world of the dead will merge into one." We spent the rest of the day trying to understand the nature of what was happening. Polina studied the technical characteristics of the radio station. I went through the archives in search of similar cases. By evening, the picture began to become clearer. The Spectre 2 radio station was an experimental model developed at NII 47 to study anomalous communications. Officially, the project was closed in 1988 after a series of accidents. Unofficially, rework continued until the collapse of the Union. They were trying to establish a connection with the other side, I explained to Polina. Not for mystical purposes, but to obtain strategic information. Imagine a connection with dead intelligence officers, access to the enemy's secrets through contact with his dead agents. And something went wrong? Something always goes wrong when you try to disrupt the natural order of things. In the evening, I walked Paulina home and was left alone with the radio. The fingerprints on its body glowed in the dark with a weak phosphorescent light. I understood that each communication session brought me closer to a dangerous line. But I could not stop. Tomorrow I had to save the girl at the railroad crossing. I turned on the station for the last time that day. The airwaves were silent. But suddenly I heard a distant child crying, then a man's voice in an unfamiliar language, a woman's laughter turning into sobs. "Anna?" I called. "I'm here, Alyosha. But I'm not alone. Everyone who can't find peace comes here. Everyone who has unfinished business in the world of the living. How many of you are there? More than you can imagine. And with each rescue you make, there are more. Each death you prevent creates a new connection between worlds." Anna's voice became weaker and weaker, as if she was moving away from the microphone. "Alyosha, be careful. Not everyone here means well. Some voices lie to lure the living to their side. How to distinguish truth from lies? Listen with your heart, not your mind. And remember, every rescue brings you closer to us." The radio went silent. I turned it off and climbed up from the basement. Outside the windows lay a sleeping city, where people had ordinary dreams about the future, not suspecting that this future had already been determined by voices from the past. Tomorrow I would have to intervene in the course of events again, save the girl, and thus bring about the end, my own or the end of the whole world. But there was no choice. Once you hear the voices of the dead, you can't stop hearing them. Once you start saving, you can't stop halfway. The road to truth lies through death. But sometimes death is not the end of the road, but its beginning. The railway crossing near the village of Sosnovka was a typical scene in the Russian hinterland. Rusty barriers, potholes in the asphalt, a rickety guard's house. I arrived here half an hour before the appointed time, parking my car in the willow thicket. At 4:30 p.m., 8-year-old Lena Morozova was supposed to die here. I didn't know how exactly it would happen, but Anna's voice had never been wrong. Polina sat next to me in the salon, nervously fiddling with the strap of her bag with recording equipment. After yesterday's communication session, she had become different. Her gaze was lost somewhere inside. Her hands were shaking. She often looked around, as if someone was calling her by name. The border between the worlds was thinning, and my assistant was beginning to feel the presence of those who remained on the other side. "Doctor," she said quietly, not taking her eyes off the crossing, "what if we're making a mistake? What if interfering with people's destinies upsets some cosmic balance?" I didn't answer because I was asking myself the same question. In the 3 days of our acquaintance with Anna's voice, I had managed to prevent a car accident and a gas boiler explosion. But the children saved from the bus died of poisoning in the hospital. The Kuznetsov family, according to Anna, was doomed to die in a fire a week later. Death really couldn't be defeated. It could only be redirected, postponed, deceived for a short time. At 16:15, a girl in a red jacket approached the crossing. Her light hair was sticking out from under a knitted cap, and she was holding a plastic shovel and a bucket in her hands. She had been playing in the sandbox near the tracks. Lena Morozova. In 15 minutes, she was supposed to die under the wheels of a freight train. I got out of the car and walked towards the crossing, trying to look as natural as possible. The girl was digging in the sand, humming a nursery rhyme. She was so absorbed in her game that she didn't notice my approach. "Hello," I said, squatting down next to her. "What's your name?" "Lena," she answered, without raising her eyes from the sand cakes. "And who are you?" "I'm a doctor. What are you doing here alone?" "Mom went to the store, and told me to wait here. The distant rumble of an approaching train could already be heard in the air. There were 10 minutes left until 4:30 p.m. I stood up and extended my hand to the girl. Let's get out of here. It's dangerous to play here. Why? Lena looked at me with childish curiosity. A train will pass soon. Very big and loud. Better to move away. She obediently took my hand, and we walked away from the tracks to a safe distance. Exactly at 4:30 p.m., a freight train thundered past the crossing, a long line of cars loaded with coal. If the girl had stayed to play by the tracks. A few minutes later, a middle-aged woman appeared, apparently Lena's mother. She thanked me for caring for her daughter and took her home. Another life saved, another victory over fate. But when Polina and I were driving back to the city, I felt no joy, only emptiness and a strange anxiety, as if I had done something wrong, violated some fundamental law. Polina was silent the whole way, but just before entering the city, she suddenly spoke. I can hear them. Boom. Voices. On the radio, in the noise of the wind, even in the silence. They whisper different things. Some ask for help, others warn of danger. And then there are those that laugh. I stopped the car on the side of the road and turned to her. Polina's face was pale. Her eyes seemed larger than usual. When did it start? Last night, after you turned off the radio. At first I thought it was fatigue, stress. But the voices are becoming clearer. So, the boundaries were collapsing not only for me. Polina also fell under the influence of the other world, became a conductor between dimensions. My gift of audio vision spread to her, infected her consciousness. We returned to the archives when the sun had already set. The basement greeted us with the familiar dampness and smell of old papers. The radio station Spectre, too, was waiting on the table, its metal case reflecting the light of the lamp. The fingerprints on the side panel were brighter, as if someone had recently touched the device. I turned on the station and tuned in to the frequency 19.47. The airwaves were not empty. Distant voices could be heard, snatches of conversations in different languages, children's cries, old people's muttering. The world of the dead was becoming crowded. Alyosha? Anna's voice cut through the cacophony of sounds. I'm here, Anya. The girl is saved. I know, but not for long. In 3 days, she will drown in the pond near the house. Each of her predictions was like a stab. Salvations turned out to be an illusion, a delay of the inevitable. Then why all this? I asked, if death will overtake them anyway. Time, Alyosha. We give them time. Lena will spend these 3 days with her mother, tell her how much she loves her. The Kuznetsov family will make peace with their eldest son, with whom they have not spoken for 2 years. The children from the bus will write letters to their parents. There was something new in Anna's voice, a weariness that had not been present in the first communication sessions. Every rescue requires energy, she continued. The energy of those here on this side. We grow weaker with each intervention. Then why continue? Because this is our purpose. We are a bridge between worlds. But a bridge cannot withstand any load. At that moment, Polina screamed and stepped back from the table. I turned to her. What's happened? There, in the corner, she pointed with a trembling finger to the far corner of the basement. There's a man standing there. Old, in a military uniform. He looks at me and says something, but I don't understand the words. I looked where she was pointing, but all I saw were shadows between the shelves. But Polina clearly saw something else. He says he knows you, she whispered. He says he served with you in the north. His name was Nikolai. I broke out in a cold sweat. Nikolai Krutov, my colleague in the radio unit. He died in 1986 while testing new communications equipment. Officially, it was an accident. Unofficially, an experiment in contact with the other side went wrong. He warns, Polina continued, her voice growing quieter, that you're going too far, that you will not be able to return soon. The figure in the corner, according to her description, nodded and disappeared into the shadows. Polina sank into a chair, breathing heavily. Doctor, what's happening to me? The same thing that happens to me. The border between the worlds collapses, and we find ourselves on both sides of it at the same time. Anna's voice in the headphones became louder, more insistent. Alyosha, we need to meet. For real. How is this possible? Come tomorrow to the lighthouse in Taraburka, the same one where we once met. At midnight, I will explain everything to you about the nature of death and the price of salvation and what awaits us next. Is it dangerous? For you, yes. But there is no choice. Your assistant begins to hear voices. Soon she will not be able to distinguish the world of the living from the world of the dead. And then the same thing will happen to you. And the meeting at the lighthouse will stop this. The meeting at the lighthouse will end everything, one way or another. The connection was lost. The radio station went silent, leaving us in the silence of the basement. Polina sat with her head in her hands, her shoulders shaking. I'm afraid, doctor, she whispered. I'm afraid I'm going crazy. I'm afraid these voices will never stop. I walked up to her, put my hand on her shoulder. Her skin was cold, as if part of her had already moved to the world of the dead. Tomorrow it will all end, I said, not being sure of my own words. I will meet Anna and find out the truth. And if you don't come back? This question hung in the air without an answer. I myself did not know what awaited me at the lighthouse in Taraburka. A meeting with the ghost of my wife could become both the solution to all the mysteries and a one-way ticket to the world of the dead. But there was no choice. Polina was weakening before our eyes. The boundaries of her consciousness were blurring under the onslaught of otherworldly voices. If I didn't find a way to stop the process, she would go crazy or, even worse, remain forever in the world of ghosts. I walked her home and returned to the archive to prepare for the next day's trip. The lighthouse in Taraburka was a 4-hour drive from the city. The place of my first dates with Anna, where we dreamed of the future, not suspecting that it would last only a few months. The last time I turned on the radio, I heard not my wife's voice, but a chorus of voices, male and female, old and young, speaking different languages. They all called me to them, promised answers to all questions, peace from the tormenting uncertainty. Tomorrow, I said into the empty basement. Tomorrow I will know the truth. The radio went silent, but the fingerprints on its body glowed brighter. Somewhere in the metal depths of the device, someone else's heart was beating, someone else's life was pulsating, or what was left of it after death. The road to truth lay through an encounter with the past. But some encounters change not only the present, they rewrite the very nature of reality. The road to Taraburka lasted 4 agonizing hours. The November tundra outside the car windows seemed dead, bare hills under a low leaden sky, rare birches twisted by the wind, endless swamps with ice showing through. This landscape reflected my inner state in the best possible way. Emptiness, in which the lonely thought of the upcoming meeting was beating. Polina was supposed to stay in the city, but at the last moment she insisted on going with me. To scientifically record the contact, she said, although in her eyes I saw not research excitement, but fear. Fear of being left alone with the voices that were becoming louder and more insistent. Now she heard them not only on the radio, but in everyday sounds, in the hum of cars, the noise of the wind, even in her own breathing. We took the radio station Spectre 2 with us. It lay on the back seat in a metal case, and I felt its presence as if it were a living being. The fingerprints on the case were now constantly glowing, with a weak phosphorescent light, visible even in daylight. The border between the worlds was thinning with each passing hour. The lighthouse in Taraburka stood on a rocky cape washed by the cold waters of the Barents Sea. The white tower, 30 meters high, built in Tsarist times, served as a landmark for fishermen and military ships. For me, this place was associated with the brightest memories. It was here that I first kissed Anna. Here we planned our future together. Here I proposed to her. We arrived at the lighthouse around 11 o'clock in the evening. The wind from the sea was piercing, salty, full of foreboding. Polina was shivering not only from the cold. Her face was deathly pale. Her lips had acquired a bluish tint. The voices of the dead were sucking the life out of her, like vampires sucking blood. "Doctor," she whispered, clutching at my sleeve, "there are more of them. They're all around us. Some are evil, very evil." I looked back, but saw only a deserted shore and the silhouette of a lighthouse against the starry sky. But I felt the same as Polina, the presence of many invisible entities watching us from a parallel dimension. The air around the lighthouse literally vibrated with their energy. We climbed the spiral staircase to the caretaker's quarters at the top of the tower. The room was small, with windows facing all four directions. An old caretaker who kept the lighthouse fire going used to live here. Now the room was empty. Automation had replaced the man, as happened everywhere in a modern world. I set up the radio on an old wooden table and plugged it into a standalone power source. Polina laid out her recording equipment, but her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely hold the equipment. "Doctor," her voice shook. "What if this is a trap? What if the dead have lured us here for something terrible?" This thought crossed my mind more than once. But Anna's voice was too familiar, too dear. I could not believe that she was capable of betrayal, even after death. When the clock showed 5 minutes to midnight, I turned on the radio. The airwaves were unusually clear. No interference, no extraneous signals. Only silence, full of expectation. Exactly at midnight, Anna's voice sounded in the headphones, but now it was different. Not distant and distorted, as in previous sessions, but alive, voluminous, as if she was standing next to him. "Alyosha, you've come." "Yes, Anya. I'm here. Look out the window. To the west." I walked to the western window and looked out at the sea. What I saw made me clutch the sill. On the water, a few kilometers from the shore, there was a strange glow, not the northern lights, not the reflection of city lights. The light was warm, golden, and silhouettes could be discerned in it. "It's us," said Anna's voice. "All those who could not find peace. We exist between worlds, in a space that your science cannot explain. Why can't you find peace? Because I am connected to you. Every memory you have of me is a thread that keeps me here. Every name you speak is an anchor that keeps me from leaving." Polina suddenly screamed and recoiled from the table. I turned to her. "What's happened?" "She's here," Polina whispered. "Your wife. She's standing right next to the radio station." I strained my eyes, but saw only empty space. But the air in the place where Polina pointed seemed denser, as if filled with an invisible substance. "Alyosha." Anna's voice became quieter, more intimate. "Your assistant sees me because the border between the worlds is collapsing. Every time we communicate, it becomes thinner. Soon it will disappear completely. What will happen then? The world of the dead and the world of the living will merge. Everyone who has ever died will return. But this is not a resurrection. It is the end of all things." There was a sadness in Anna's voice that I had never heard in her life. The sadness of someone who knows too much. "There's only one way to stop this," she continued. "Someone has to become the new guardian of the border. Come over to our side voluntarily and keep the passage from being completely destroyed." I understood what she was getting at. Anna was suggesting that I die. But then who will help the living? I asked. You will be able to help from there, too. You will become a voice of warning, as I have become, but not to save specific people, but to prevent catastrophes. Polina suddenly groaned loudly and grabbed her head. Her eyes rolled back, showing only the whites. Doctor, she croaked in a strange voice, help me. I'm being sucked in. I can't resist. I rushed towards her, but she recoiled, as if she did not recognize me. There was something inhuman in her eyes, ancient and merciless. That's not her speaking, Anna's voice warned. Someone else is trying to get through her. Someone who wants to take advantage of the border's destruction for their own purposes. Polina began to speak in an unfamiliar language, guttural and archaic. The words merged into a spell or a curse. Her body began to glow with the same phosphorescent light as the prints on the radio station. Alyosha, decide quickly, and his voice became insistent. Either you come over to us voluntarily, or the border will collapse, and your assistant will become a guide for those who must remain dead. I looked at Polina, who was writhing in agony of the struggle between her consciousness and someone else's will. The young woman who believed in my abilities and agreed to help me study the paranormal. Now she was paying for my obsession with the voices of the dead. Is there another way? I asked desperately. Yes, Anna answered after a pause. But he demands a sacrifice from her, not from you. What sacrifice? She must become an anchor between the worlds. Remain alive, but connected to us forever. Hear our voices for the rest of her life. Translate them for the world of the living. This is worse than death, Alyosha. This is eternal suffering. Polina suddenly went quiet. The glow around her body went out. She opened her eyes and looked at me with terrifying clarity. Doctor, she said in her own voice, I heard. I agree. Polina, no. You don't understand what this means. I understand better than you think. She stood up from the floor, swaying. These last days I've been living between two worlds. Do you know what I realized? There, among the dead, there are those who need help no less than the living. Children lost in the passage. Old people who have forgotten the way to the light. Souls trapped in their own fears. She walked up to the radio and placed her hands on its body. The metal glowed brighter. If I become a guide, I can help them. And you will continue working with the archives. You will study the paranormal using the scientific method. This is the correct division of duties. Polina, it's my choice, doctor. I've already made it. She took my hand. Her fingers were cold, but there was a surprising strength in them. When I was little, she said, my mother told me a story about a girl who became a bridge between two banks of a river. People crossed over her, but she remained motionless, fulfilling her mission. I always dreamed of becoming such a girl. The radio began to hum. The air in the room began to vibrate, and lightning flashed outside the windows without thunder. It's beginning, said Anna's voice. Polina is making a choice. And you, Alyosha, must let me go. Stop clinging to the past so that I can find peace. It was the hardest thing I had ever done in my life. I had lived with the pain of loss for 8 years. I had held Anna's image in my heart for 8 years. Now I had to let her go forever. Goodbye, Anya, I whispered. See you, Alyosha. Someday. Anna's voice dissolved into the ether. At the same time, Polina screamed and fell to her knees. But when she raised her head, a new light was burning in her eyes. Not human, but not alien either. The light of understanding connecting two worlds. Doctor, she said in a voice that mixed together hundreds of other voices, I am now their interpreter and your guide to the world of the inexplicable. We will have much work to do. I help her up. The radio on the table went out. The fingerprints on its body disappeared. The connection with the world of the dead took on a different form. Now it passed through Polina. As we descended from the lighthouse, the dawn was already painting the horizon in pink tones. Polina walked alongside me, but I felt that she was no longer the same woman who had arrived here yesterday. She had become something more and at the same time lost a part of her humanity. "What now?" I asked. "Now the real work begins," she said, and her voice echoed all those who had not found peace. "We have 47 files in the archive. Each one is someone's lost story. It's time to give them a voice." Thus ended my personal tragedy and began a new chapter in the study of the paranormal. Paulina became a bridge between worlds, and I became the keeper of their secrets. Ahead of us were new archives, new voices, new stories about how thin the line between life and death is. The radio station Spectre, too, was no longer needed. Now I listened to the voices of the dead through a living translator who sacrificed his humanity for a higher purpose. The price of knowledge is always high, but sometimes it is worth it. 3 weeks after Teraburka, the basement of the Radioelectronics Research Institute no longer seemed like a gloomy crypt of forgotten secrets. Strangely, after Anna's voice disappeared, this place acquired a different atmosphere. Not the dead silence of an archive, but the living silence of a library, where every book awaits its reader. Paulina worked at her desk, digitizing another folder of documents, but now her movements were different, more measured, as if she were listening to sounds that no one else could hear. The Spectre, 2 radios stood on the far shelf, covered with a white cloth. The fingerprints on its body disappeared the same night that Anna found peace. The device had turned into an ordinary piece of Soviet radio technology, a museum exhibit devoid of mystical properties. But it reminded me that the boundaries between the possible and the impossible are thinner than is commonly thought. Paulina raised her head from the documents and looked at me. There's always this strange light in her eyes now. Not human, but not alien either. The light of understanding those things that are inaccessible to ordinary perception. "Doctor," she said in a voice that contained barely audible echoes of other voices, "we have received a new case from the archives of the Murmansk Psychiatric Dispensary." She handed me a folder of documents. On the cover was a stamp top secret and the number, file number 020. The story of Elena Vasilyeva, an artist who in 1991 began drawing portraits of people before they died. Precise, detailed images in which the future dead were depicted already dead. Elena claimed that her hand drew on its own, without the participation of consciousness. The official diagnosis was schizophrenia with hallucinations. The unofficial version was that she had the gift of foresight, which drove the woman to madness. "She's still alive," Polina added. "She's been in the hospital for 4 years now. The doctors think she's hopeless, but I looked up from the documents. But I hear her call. She's not crazy, doctor. She just sees what's about to happen and can't stop it. Like your Anna, only the other way around. She doesn't warn about death, she records it." Paulina stood up and walked over to the shelf with archive folders. Over the past 3 weeks, their number had tripled. Letters from people who had encountered the inexplicable were arriving from different cities across the country. Rumors about Dr. Lazarev, who studies paranormal phenomena, were spreading through unofficial channels. Former employees of closed institutes, relatives of missing researchers, witnesses of anomalous events. They were all looking for answers to questions that official science preferred to ignore. "How many cases do we have to work on?" I asked. 47 active files. And these are only the ones for which there is enough information to begin an investigation. 47 stories of people who encountered something beyond the ordinary. 47 attempts to understand the nature of phenomena that science declared non-existent. Each file is someone's pain, someone's unanswered questions, someone's cry for help. "What do the voices hear?" I asked. Are there any matters that require immediate intervention? Paulina closed her eyes and listened to what was inaccessible to my perception. Her face became focused, detached. At such moments, she ceased to be completely human, becoming a guide between worlds. There is one, she said finally. File number 023. The case of children who disappear from the Zvezdaka Pioneer camp outside Moscow. Officially, they are escapes, but the children return a few days later with memory lapses and strange drawings. They draw the same thing: underground tunnels and figures in white coats. When did it start? 2 weeks ago. During this time, 6 children have disappeared and returned. The 7th disappeared yesterday. The voices say he has little time. I picked up the folder with file number 023 and delved into the documents. The story was typical for our archive. The official version did not explain all the facts. Witnesses were afraid to tell the truth, and the authorities preferred to keep silent about what was happening. But behind the facade of the ordinary, something darker and more complex was hidden. The Zvezdaka Pioneer Camp was built in 1967 on the site of a former research site. The documents mentioned experiments to study the effects on children's psyche in isolation conditions. The project was closed in 1985 after a series of accidents, but the underground laboratories remained intact. We need to go there, I said, closing the folder. Yes, Polina agreed, but not for both of us. Now that I've become a guide, my presence in places of power can increase paranormal activity. It's dangerous for me and for those around me. Over the past weeks, we have come to understand the cost of her transformation. Polina was no longer an ordinary person. She existed in 2 realities at once, and her presence affected the world around her. Electronics around her worked erratically. Animals avoided her, and paranormal sensitive people felt anxious in her presence. Then I'll go alone, I decided. Not alone. Polina went to the table and took an old-style dictaphone out of the drawer. Take this. I tuned it to a special frequency. It will record not only sounds, but also other vibrations. If you encounter something inexplicable, I will hear it here and can help. The recorder was heavy, metallic, and clearly Soviet-made. The body showed signs of modifications, additional wires, non-standard connectors, a small screen with incomprehensible symbols. Is this your development? Joint. I provided the technical base, and the voices told me how to modify it. There was a slight sadness in her voice. I can no longer be with you in the field, doctor, but I can help from here. I spent the next day preparing for the trip to the Pioneer Camp. I studied maps of the area, contacted local authorities, and collected information about the missing child. A boy named Andrei Korotkov, 10 years old, disappeared during his afternoon nap. He was last seen near an old bomb shelter on the campgrounds. Polina, meanwhile, worked with the archives, systematizing information and building connections between different cases. In a short time, she became not just my assistant, but a full-fledged partner in paranormal research. Her ability to hear the voices of the dead complemented my gift of audio vision, creating a unique team for studying the inexplicable. The evening before leaving, I sat in the archive for a long time, thinking about the changes that had taken place. 3 months ago, I was a lonely researcher studying paranormal phenomena in complete solitude. Now, I had an assistant who became a bridge between worlds, and an archive that had become a center for studying the unexplained. But the most important change was in me. Meeting Anna's voice, saving people from predicted tragedies, Polina's sacrifice. All this showed me the true nature of my gift. I could not only hear the imprints of the past in objects, but also help souls stuck between worlds find peace or purpose. Doctor, Paulina's voice interrupted my thoughts. I recorded instructions for you on how to use the modified dictaphone. And also, I send greetings from Anna. I looked up surprised. Is she still here? No, she found peace. But before she left a message. She thanks you for letting her go and asks you not to blame yourself for what happened to me. It was my choice, and she respects it. Something in my chest was painfully compressed. Even after death, even having found peace, Anna continued to care for me. What else did she say? That we have much work ahead of us, that the world is full of lost souls who need help, and that every voice saved makes the border between the worlds stronger, not weaker. The next morning, I went to the Moscow suburban pioneer camp, Zvezdaka. In the trunk lay a modified dictaphone and a folder with file number 023. Another story was waiting for its researcher. Another mystery demanded a solution. But now I knew that I was not alone in this matter. In the basement of the Radioelectronics Research Institute, Polina was waiting for me, my guide to the world of the paranormal, the translator of the voices of those who could not find peace. And somewhere in the space between the worlds, Anna's soul rested, having finally found peace and quiet. The path to truth lies through the understanding that death is not the end, but a transition. But some cannot make this transition on their own. And then those who are able to hear their voices come to their aid. End of file number 019. Dr. Lazarev's archive has been updated. Status: transferred for study. Next file, number 020, The Artist of Death. Investigation start date: tomorrow. There are 47 active cases in Dr. Lazarev's archive. Each one is someone's lost story waiting to be told. Each one is a key to understanding the nature of what lies beyond the visible world. The work continues.